I didn't lose my marriage because I was broke. I lost it because I refused to erase a debt she never told me about. That sentence didn't make sense to me at first. It took time to understand it, the way it takes time for a bruise to surface after the impact. At the beginning, everything looked normal. Too normal. And that was the first warning I ignored. Before I go any further, pause for a second and tell me, where are you watching from right now? Because if you've ever felt quietly cornered by expectations you never agreed to, you'll recognize what comes next. The afternoon my parents called us over, I already knew the tone. They said they wanted to talk about the future, which in my family always meant the future had already been decided. I drove there with my wife, Lauren, sitting beside me, her knee bouncing slightly as we waited at red lights. I told myself she was just nervous for me. I told myself a lot of things back then. My older brother, Adam, was already inside when we arrived. He was relaxed, leaning back like someone who belonged everywhere he stood. The house itself felt like an extension of him, glass, light, expensive furniture that didn't pretend to be practical. My parents loved that house the way they loved outcomes that made sense to other people. We sat down. Small talk floated around the room, thin and pointless. Then my father cleared his throat, and my mother folded her hands like she was about to deliver good news to the right person. "We've decided to take care of everything now," my father said. "While we're still around." A folder slid across the coffee table toward Adam. Thick. Heavy. It made a sound when it landed, a sound that felt final. He opened it slowly, smiling as if the universe had finally stopped playing games. The house. Fully transferred. Prime location. My mother leaned over and kissed his cheek, already talking about how proud she was, about how nice it would be to keep things in the family. Then my father turned to me. He pushed a much thinner folder in my direction. "Your grandfather left you the land," he said. That was it. I opened the folder and stared at the deed. 40 acres in a rural county most people only noticed when they needed gas. An abandoned property that hadn't been farmed in decades. No house worth mentioning. No development. Just land everyone had quietly agreed wasn't worth the trouble. I waited for another sentence. For context. For balance. Nothing came. Lauren didn't say anything either. She smiled politely, nodded at my parents, and thanked them like someone who didn't want to draw attention to herself. That smile stayed on her face the entire drive home, but it never reached her eyes. "So," she said eventually, staring out the window. "What do you think you'll do with it?" I said we could sell it. That land was still land. That maybe it was worth something. The words felt thin as I said them, like I was trying to convince myself first. Lauren nodded slowly, thoughtfully, like she was filing the answer away for later. At home, the tension followed us inside. She wandered from room to room, checking her phone, opening the fridge, closing it again. Finally, she said she needed a shower. I sat at the kitchen table, the deed spread out in front of me, trying to understand how two pieces of paper could feel so different in weight. That night, the first crack appeared. Lauren sat across from me on the couch, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. "We should talk about money," she said. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was how carefully she avoided specifics. She talked about things being tight. About the future being uncertain. About how she'd been carrying stress for a while and didn't want to overwhelm me. Every sentence ended just before it became concrete. I asked her if there was something she wasn't telling me. She shook her head too quickly. "No. I just think we need a plan. Plans are easy to agree to when you don't know what you're planning for." I nodded. We went to bed. She turned away from me and fell asleep faster than I expected. I didn't sleep at all. 2 days later, the mail arrived early. I almost didn't open it. Almost. But one envelope didn't look like the others. No return address I recognized. Official. Heavy. The kind of envelope that carries consequences. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Lauren. I opened it by mistake. At least, that's what I told myself at first. A collection notice slid out onto the table. Then another. Then another envelope from a different lender, tucked inside the first like it had been hidden on purpose. Numbers stared back at me, sharp and unforgiving. Credit cards. Personal loans. Minimum payments that hadn't been made. This wasn't one mistake. It was a system. When Lauren came home that evening, I was sitting at the table with the envelopes lined up neatly in front of me. She stopped in the doorway the second she saw them. "How long?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. She set her bag down slowly, like any sudden movement might make things worse. Then she started explaining. About pressure. About keeping up. About how she thought she could handle it before it got this far. I asked her how much. She told me. The number landed between us and didn't move. She watched my face carefully, waiting for something. Relief. Assurance. A promise. I realized then that she wasn't afraid I'd be angry. She was afraid I wouldn't fix it. "We can take care of it," she said finally. "We'll figure it out." "We." The word sounded rehearsed. I asked her what she expected that to look like. She hesitated. "Just long enough." "Well," she said, "you have the land." That was the moment everything shifted. I didn't respond right away. I looked down at the deed still sitting on the counter, the thing everyone had dismissed without a second thought. And I realized she hadn't been hiding debt because she was ashamed. She'd been hiding it because she assumed I'd eventually absorb it. I told her I needed time to think. She nodded, but her expression changed. Not worried. Calculating. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, understanding for the first time that this wasn't just about money. It was about expectation. About what she believed my role was when things went wrong. And I knew that by morning, I was going to make a decision that would end something, one way or another. But before I tell you what I decided, you need to understand what refusing really meant. Because once I said no, there was no going back. I knew what she expected me to say before I opened my mouth. I was supposed to reassure her. To tell her it was fine. To say we'd handle it together and quietly absorb the consequences like we always did. That's how it had worked every other time life leaned on us. I was the one who steadied things. The one who adjusted. The one who made room. I told her I couldn't do that this time. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her. I said it slowly, carefully, like I was placing something fragile on a table. I told her I would help her plan. I would help her take responsibility going forward. But I wasn't going to wipe the debt away by selling the land or taking on loans in my name. The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was disbelief. She stared at me like she was waiting for the rest of the sentence. Like refusal was just a pause before agreement. When nothing came, her face changed, not into anger, not yet, but into something sharper. "So you're just going to let this destroy us?" she asked. That question was the first open threat. I told her it didn't have to. That we could work through it honestly. That hiding it had done more damage than the debt itself. As I spoke, I could feel the ground shifting under us, not because of what I was saying, but because of what I wasn't. I wasn't rescuing her. She accused me of choosing pride over partnership. Of caring more about dirt than about us. She said things she'd clearly been holding back for a while, words that came out practiced and ready, like she'd imagined this argument before. "You know how embarrassing this is for me," she said. "Do you have any idea what it looks like if people find out?" That was when I understood something important. This wasn't about survival. It was about image. I asked her how long she'd assumed I'd cover it. She didn't answer directly. She talked around it, the way you do when the truth is inconvenient. She said she thought we were building toward something. That I'd eventually have more. That the land might be worth something if I'd stop being pessimistic. There it was. The assumption that I would become whatever was necessary to justify the choices she'd already made. I told her I wasn't paying it off. Not now. Not later. Not quietly. She stood up so fast the chair scraped across the floor. She paced the room, running her hands through her hair, muttering about timing and pressure and how unfair this was. I watched her and realized I'd never seen her like this, not because she was upset, but because she was cornered. That night, she packed. Not in a rush. Not in tears. With controlled movements, like someone who'd already decided how the scene would end. She told me she needed space. That she couldn't stay with someone who wouldn't support her when it mattered. I didn't argue. When the door closed behind her, the sound felt final in a way I hadn't expected. Not dramatic. Just complete. I stood there alone, the house too quiet, the envelopes still lined up on the table like evidence from a trial that had already reached a verdict. I didn't feel relief. I felt clarity. And that scared me more than panic ever could. The next morning, I packed a bag. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call my brother. I didn't call her. I put the deed in my glove compartment and started driving without a destination in mind. Distance felt like the only honest choice left. Before I go any further, let me ask you something. What would you have done right then? Paid the debt to keep the peace, or protected the last boundary you had? Comment below, because that answer says more than people like to admit. The city thinned behind me. Highways stretched into long, empty roads. Cell service faded. For the first time in weeks, no one was watching me closely. No one was waiting for me to become something useful to them. When I finally reached the land, I understood why everyone had dismissed it. The farmhouse leaned to one side like it was tired of standing. The barn roof had collapsed inward, surrendering to years of neglect. Fences sagged, broken in places where no one had bothered to repair them. Weeds claimed the fields like they'd earned the right. I stood there with my hands on my hips, staring out at 40 acres of inconvenience, and felt something close to bitter amusement. This was the future my wife had been willing to gamble on. This was what she judged my worth against. I walked the perimeter slowly, boots crunching against dry ground. The land felt forgotten. Written off. I recognized the feeling. I called a local agent and asked what it would take to sell. If you want it gone fast, he said, you're looking at a few thousand. Hunting land, maybe. A few thousand. I thanked him and hung up, staring at the horizon. That number was smaller than the debt Lauren had hidden. Smaller than the expectations she'd placed on me. The next morning, the surveyor arrived. His name was Cole. He didn't say much at first. He just stood there, scanning the land like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. After a while, he looked at me and asked a question that didn't fit the situation. You sure you want to sell? Yes, I said automatically. He nodded, but his expression didn't match his agreement. As he worked, I wandered the property alone, memories of my grandfather surfacing unexpectedly. How he'd refused offers without explanation. How he'd insisted certain areas stay untouched. At the time, I'd thought it was stubbornness. Cole stopped near the tree line and knelt down, brushing dirt away with his hand. He frowned, scooped soil into a bag, sealed it, and wrote something on the label. Is something wrong? I asked. He glanced up. Too early to say. That answer followed me the rest of the day. That night, I drove into the nearest town for food. A small diner sat on the corner, its sign flickering like it hadn't been updated in decades. Conversations paused when I walked in. I took a seat at the counter. You're Earl's grandson, aren't you? The waitress asked, already pouring coffee. I nodded. He loved that land, she said. Turned people away for years. Everyone says it's worthless, I replied. She smiled faintly. Worthless things don't attract buyers every year for 20 years. I froze. Buyers. I barely slept. When Cole returned the next morning, he didn't waste time. Mark, he said, holding a thick folder. We need to talk. We sat on the porch, the wood creaking beneath us. He opened the folder slowly, deliberately. I ran independent tests, he said. Pulled old records. Double-checked everything. My heart started pounding. Your land isn't dead, he continued. It's one of the most valuable plots I've surveyed in this region. The words didn't register at first. Valuable how? I asked. He met my eyes. Worth a fortune. The porch felt like it tilted beneath me. I thought of the envelopes on my kitchen table. Of the refusal. Of the door closing behind my wife. Of the land she'd expected me to sell without hesitation. And in that moment, I realized something that changed the weight of everything. Refusing to pay her debt hadn't ruined me. It might have saved me. But once this truth came out, nothing was going to stay quiet for long. I didn't tell anyone what Cole had shown me. Not my parents. Not my brother. And definitely not Lauren. I sat on the porch long after his truck disappeared down the dirt road, the folder heavy on my knees, listening to the wind move through grass that everyone had agreed wasn't worth noticing. The land didn't look different. It felt different. Like it had been holding its breath and finally let it out. That feeling stayed with me longer than excitement ever could. My phone buzzed before sunset. Unknown number. I let it ring. Then another call. And another. Messages started stacking up, all of them carefully worded, all of them pretending not to know more than they should. I turned the phone face down. If information was leaking already, speed was about to become the weapon everyone used against me. Before I go any further, let me ask you something. If you suddenly found out you were sitting on something valuable, would you tell the people who underestimated you first, or would you wait to see who came looking? Because I waited, and that choice revealed more than money ever could. The next morning, my mother called. Your father and I are worried, she said, skipping past concern straight into control. Adam said you've been making decisions out there without guidance. I had the land surveyed, I replied. The pause that followed was not subtle. And, my father asked, joining the call like he'd been listening the whole time. It's worth more than we thought, I said carefully. How much more, my mother asked. Enough that I'm not selling it. Silence. Then my father laughed, short and sharp. Don't be stubborn. You don't know how these things work. If there's value, we should handle it together. Handle it together. The same people who had handed my brother a house and me a problem suddenly wanted partnership. I'll manage it, I said. You're being emotional, my mother snapped. This isn't about feelings. No, I replied calmly. It's about ownership. The call ended without goodbye. 2 hours later, Adam showed up. I saw his car from the farmhouse window, clean and polished, completely wrong for the gravel drive. He stepped out wearing sunglasses and that familiar expression, the one that said he'd arrived to fix something he thought was broken. Didn't think you'd stay, he said when I met him outside. Place looks worse than I imagined. What do you want? I asked. He shrugged. Mom and Dad are worried. And honestly, so am I. You don't know what you're doing. I crossed my arms. You didn't care when you thought it was worthless. His smile faltered for half a second. So it's true, he said. There's something here. Enough, I replied. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Look, I can help you. I know investors. Lawyers. We could split it. Split it. Grandpa didn't leave it to you, I said quietly. He didn't leave it to you because you were special, Adam snapped. He left it because you were the only one dumb enough to take it. I looked at him then, really looked. The confidence built on approval. The ease of someone who'd never had to wait. Get off my land, I said. His jaw tightened. You'll regret this. Maybe, I replied. But not today. He left with gravel spraying behind him, and I stood there longer than necessary, realizing something important. Everyone who dismissed this place was suddenly very interested in controlling it. The pattern was familiar. The pressure escalated after that. Voicemails warning me about zoning issues. Emails suggesting environmental reviews I'd never heard of. Deadlines that appeared out of nowhere, each one framed like a favor. Someone wanted me rushed. Someone wanted me scared. So I hired an attorney. Her name was Helen. She didn't know my family, didn't care about history, and didn't smile when she didn't mean it. She read through Cole's report twice, then leaned back in her chair and studied me like I was the variable in the room. You've been underestimated, she said. That's an advantage. But only if you stay quiet and patient. I followed her advice. I declined early offers without countering. I ignored artificial deadlines. I let rumors swirl without confirmation. And slowly, the tone changed. My parents stopped advising and started asking. Adam stopped mocking and started negotiating. And then Lauren reached out. Her message came late one evening, just as the sun dipped behind the fields. It was careful. Reflective. Full of the right words in the wrong order. She talked about fear. About pressure. About how overwhelmed she'd been. She didn't mention the debt directly. She didn't have to. I didn't know how strong you really were, she wrote. I judged you based on what I thought life was supposed to look like. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to punish her. Because timing tells the truth, and hers was loud. She hadn't reached out when she thought I was stuck with nothing. She'd reached out when the ground under my feet stopped looking empty. The first serious offer arrived the following week. It came by courier, sealed and heavy, like it was afraid of the mailbox. I didn't open it right away. I made coffee. I sat at the old kitchen table. I listened to the farmhouse settle around me, every creak sounding like patience. When I finally opened it, the number almost made me laugh. It was high enough to change my life. It was also low enough to insult my grandfather. I folded the letter and set it aside. By noon, 3 more arrived. Different companies. Different language. Same urgency. That told me everything. Because when everyone suddenly wants what they once ignored, it means the real game has finally started. And I was done letting other people decide what I was worth. That night, as the sun faded and the land stretched quiet in every direction, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't family. It wasn't Lauren. It was an invitation. Private meeting. Neutral location. No paperwork up front. I stared at the screen, understanding that whatever happened next would decide who controlled the story from here on out. I picked up the phone to respond. But before I did, I realized something else. Saying no once had already changed my life. What I was about to say next would decide who got to rewrite it. I didn't answer the invitation right away. I let it sit there on my phone while I stood on the porch and watched the land go dark. Crickets started up near the tree line. Wind moved through the grass in slow waves. Nothing rushed me out here, and for the first time in my life, neither did I. I called Helen instead. She didn't sound surprised. That's the real offer, she said after reading the message. This is where power shifts. Go, but listen more than you talk. The meeting took place in a quiet office overlooking a river. No flashy decor. No wasted words. The man across from me didn't introduce himself like someone who needed to be remembered. He slid a folder across the table and waited. The number inside was staggering. Not shocking. Not dizzying. Just heavy. The kind of number that presses down on you until you realize how many decisions it could erase if you let it. That's contingent on full rights, he said. No delays. No public noise. I leaned back in my chair. No, I said. He blinked once. Excuse me? No, I repeated. I'm not selling everything. He studied me again, slower this time. Most people don't say no to that figure. I'm not most people, I replied. What do you want? He asked. I thought of the envelopes on my kitchen table. Of the way Lauren had assumed I'd absorb her choices. Of how easily everyone reached for something they hadn't respected until it gained value. I want control, I said. Phased development. Environmental oversight. Local investment. Transparency. A slow smile crossed his face. You've done your homework. I've spent my life being told what things were worth, I said. I'm done outsourcing that. The negotiation lasted hours. When I walked out, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the realization that I hadn't just protected the land. I'd claimed it. Word traveled fast after that. Not details. Just enough. Pressure turned into politeness. Demand softened into suggestions. My parents stopped calling daily. Adam stopped showing up unannounced. Lauren tried one last time. Her message was longer than the others. More reflective. She talked about how she'd been scared. About expectations. About how she wished she'd handled things differently. She didn't ask for money. She didn't mention the debt. She talked about us like the word still had weight. I read it once. Then I deleted it. Not out of anger. Out of closure. The partnership finalized quietly 3 months later. Not a sale. An agreement that kept ownership where it belonged. The first machine arrived at sunrise, rolling down the dirt road without ceremony. No press. No celebration. Just progress. I stood on the porch with a mug of coffee and watched it approach, feeling something finally settle inside me. This wasn't leverage anymore. This was real. I hired locals first. People who remembered my grandfather turning buyers away without explanation. They didn't ask why he'd done it. They just nodded and said, he always knew something. Every contract included protections he would have approved of. Environmental safeguards. Community reinvestment. Local jobs before outsiders. Growth without erasure. Money came, but it didn't lead. It followed. My parents visited again months later. The land looked different then. Still rough. Still honest. But alive. Survey flags dotted the fields. Equipment rested near the barn like it had always belonged there. I never imagined this, my mother said softly. That's okay, I replied. You weren't supposed to. Adam came last. He didn't bring jokes. He didn't bring arrogance. He brought paperwork. I want in, he said flatly, sliding a proposal across the table. I didn't look at it. You always do, he continued. This scale needs people like me. I met his eyes. No. You don't even know what I'm offering. I know who's offering, I said. That's enough. He leaned back, disbelief flickering across his face. You think Grandpa trusted you more? I know he did, I replied. Why? He asked quietly. I stood and walked him to the window, pointing toward the field where the first tests had been taken. Because when something looks worthless, you walk away, I said. And when something looks hard, I stay. He gathered his papers slowly, anger giving way to something closer to resignation. He left without another word. That evening, I drove to the far edge of the property where my grandfather used to sit on an overturned bucket and drink his coffee. I sat there until the sun dipped low, the land glowing gold. They thought he'd left me nothing. They thought he'd punished me. But he'd done something else entirely. He'd given me space to be overlooked. To be tested. To decide who I was when no one was watching. And now that everyone was, it was already too late to take it away. Refusing to pay off that debt didn't make me heartless. It made me honest. Because the real inheritance wasn't buried beneath the ground. It was the boundary that saved me when everyone else expected me to erase myself. And that was something no one could ever take back. If you've ever been pressured to fix someone else's choices just to keep the peace, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. More stories like this are coming.